And with that, everyone aboard lost their lives. "Jesus!" Mom screamed all of a sudden. She dashed into her room and returned with her phone. She was wailing and at the same time dialing Dad's number, but it didn't go through. After many attempts, she flung her phone aside and started to roll on the floor. People around started to console her, but Mom wailed so inconsolably that the people around even joined her in shedding tears. Jeffrey's heart broke, and he was deeply hurt. He sat quietly on one of the couches, watching Mom and his siblings cry out their lungs. If only Dad had listened to him and cancelled his flight. Grandma's corpse was still unburied and in the mortuary, courtesy of Dad. Now he had joined his mother in the great beyond. How would they now go about all these arrangements? Dad's friend abroad called them the following day to sympathize with them, and Mom kept asking him if there were people who survived it. "No survivor, I'm so sorry. The airplane blew up and even their bodies were not found," he said. As soon as Mom heard that, the phone fell off her left ear and she passed out, leaning her head on the shoulder of the person sitting beside her. An hour later, Jeffrey's uncle arrived from wherever he went with a hand in his pocket and then marched into the sitting room like a soldier on parade. "Now that your husband is no more, please tell the military men you guys mobilized to allow us to carry my mother's corpse from the mortuary. She needs to be buried. Her cult members have given us 3 more days to allow them to bury her, and I do not want any more troubles for this family," he said. "You're not even bothered about your only brother's sudden demise?" Mom quizzed with eyes so teary. "How's that my business? He brought it upon himself," he said, and then turned, leaving the sitting room. Mom picked up her phone and then dialed one of the military men's phone numbers who had been at the mortuary, telling him to please allow Grandma's people to carry her corpse for burial. But he blatantly refused, telling Mom that she wasn't the one who mobilized them, and that until they received a signal to leave the mortuary from their boss, who was Dad's friend, they wouldn't move. Mom paused without uttering any more words, ended the call, and then called Dad's friend who was their boss. "I am sorry, madam. I'm aware of the situation on the ground. When you fix a date for your husband's funeral, let me know. But I can't tell my men to vacate the premises of the mortuary just yet, until I'm very sure that your husband is no more," he said. "He is no more. Even his friend abroad confirmed that he was aboard the plane, and his lines are not going through. What other confirmation do you need? Please, sir, allow them to carry their corpse. We are already facing enough troubles here," Mom pleaded. "I'm sorry, madam. I'm only doing my job," he said, and then hung up. Mom turned, locking stares with Jeffrey. Her eyes already looked so tired from crying. Jeffrey bowed his head, and for the first time since Dad died, he dropped a tear. His uncle came into the living room again, and then stood before Mom. "How far?" "Have you called them?" he queried, and Mom nodded. "So what's going on?" "What did they say?" Mom raised her head and then heaved a sigh. "They said, their boss said that he needs to be sure that my husband is no more before calling back his men, and that when we fix a date for my husband's funeral, we should let him know," she said. His uncle looked at her and then nodded his head. "That's not a problem. The funeral service and that of Mama will be in 3 days. Please call him back and tell him that. We have no time to waste," he said. "What? Are you this mean?" Mom queried in a thunderous tone, but Jeffrey's uncle turned and left without a word. What now happens to Auntie Ibinabo's trapped ghost? Jeffrey asked himself. He got up to go into his room to at least rest his head a little. He was so exhausted from all the happenings around him. He walked down the passage with a hand rubbing his eyes. As soon as he passed by Grandma's door, he turned and looked at it, and lo and behold, he saw the door opened halfway with the key stuck in the keyhole. He approached it and then peeked inside but saw no one. "Hello, is anybody in?" he asked, but heard no response. He turned and looked left and right, and then sneaked into the room. He quietly shut the door behind him, approached the mirror, and then uncovered it. His heart skipped as soon as he did. "Oh, Jeffrey, you came back," said Auntie Ibinabo's ghost with a grin. The ghost stood there looking so exhausted. Jeffrey also noticed that the front of the cloth she was wearing was so wet. He raised his hand and then pointed toward the wetness. What happened? "Why is the front of your cloth so wet?" he asked. She bowed her head and then looked at it. "These are tears, Jeffrey. I'm so tired of being trapped in here. I need to be free. I need to rest in peace," she said in a pitiful tone. "What?" Jeffrey exclaimed, and tears immediately welled up in his eyes. I just need to be set free," she said, dropping a tear. "Should I let your husband know about this?" he questioned. "He wouldn't believe you because you're the only one who can see me." "You're the only one who has that gift of seeing my kind and of sensing and feeling dangers," she said. "But how can I help free you?" he asked. I'm confused, but I'm very sure you can, she said with a nod. Should I break it? He queried. It wouldn't work, except some certain things are done, she said. Wow, Jeffrey exclaimed, and then he became more confused about what next to do. And he needed to also hasten with whatever he had to do to save her. Somehow he felt this urge to go check Mama's locker. He approached it, unlocked it, and searched through, but he found nothing but old pictures. He spotted another old locker beside her wardrobe. He didn't even know what exactly he was looking for. Yes, the old locker wasn't locked. He opened it, and then he found a very old book with a plain cover. He opened the front cover, the first page, the second and third page, but found nothing. He was about to drop it when he felt the urge to open another chapter, and as soon as he did, he saw the inscription, "My Secret Book." His interest in it grew, and he stood up all of a sudden with it. He opened another chapter where he saw the table of contents, and after running his eyes through it, he saw where it was written, "How to Free a Trapped Ghost." Wow, he exclaimed, and all of a sudden, someone locked Mama's room door from outside, locking him in with Auntie Ibinabo's ghost. Jeffrey rushed to the door and attempted to force it open, but all attempts failed. He turned and then looked at the mirror, locking stares with Auntie Ibinabo's ghost. "I'm so sorry, Jeffrey," she said, and he nodded sporadically. He knew that somehow he would make it out, but not without freeing Auntie Ibinabo's trapped soul. He opened the book in his hand, and then he opened the chapter which described how to free a trapped soul. He needed 7 seeds of alligator pepper, 7 bitter cola, and 7 white collar nuts for the process. He would back the mirror after chewing the seeds of alligator pepper, and then put the bitter cola and cola nut in a basin of water. He would stand in the basin with the book in his hand, make some incantations in the book, and the trapped soul in the mirror would be freed. Of course, he needed to go out and get those things. If at all he wanted her soul freed. But how would he when the door was now locked by God knows who? "Did you find anything?" Auntie Ibinabo's ghost questioned. "Yes, but I would need to go out to get the things required," Jeffrey said with eyes still glued to the book. So how do you intend to unlock the door?" she asked again. "I don't know, but somehow I believe I will," he said, raising his head and letting out a smile. "You're just too brave," she said, managing to smile back. Jeffrey kept flipping the pages of the book open until he came across a write-up in the middle of the book, which was not included in the table of contents. He read it thoroughly, and at the end of the page, he saw this smoke that came directly from the page he opened entering into his eyes. He flung the book aside all of a sudden. He was so frightened. His eyes started to itch badly. He shut them, raised his shirt, and started to rub his eyes using the hem of his shirt. "Jeffrey, are you okay?" the ghost queried with mouth agape, staring at him. "Yes, just felt something entering my eyes," he said, stuttering. "Please be careful," the ghost said, still staring at him. After a few seconds, when the itch had calmed down, Jeffrey picked up the book again, opened to the same page, and then he saw a tiny phrase written at the corner of the page which read, "You can now accomplish whatsoever you think of, minor things around you." He thought and thought about what that could mean, but he just couldn't comprehend it. What could this mean? "You can now accomplish whatever you think of, minor things around you," he asked himself, reading it aloud. "Try opening the door. I think you now possess some kind of powers," said the ghost. "How?" "I don't think that's what it means," Jeffrey said. "Just give it a try," the ghost said, staring at him. He approached the door, twisted the handle, and it opened ajar on its own. He was in great shock. He paused, stared at both hands, and then raised his head, looking at the ghost. "I told you," the ghost said. Jeffrey swiftly closed back the door, approached the mirror, and then picked up the linen to cover it with. "Auntie Ibinabo, I'll be back for you. Let me go and get the required items needed to get you freed," he said, and she nodded sporadically, beaming with smiles. He was so happy to see the smiles on her brightened face. He was sure she hadn't felt this way for years now. He covered the mirror with the linen in his hands, picked up the book, and then dashed out of the room. He went into his room and kept the book in his luggage, took some money, and was about leaving the house when one of his siblings saw him in front of the house. "Where are you going?" she queried. I need to get a recharge card," Jeffrey said, feigning a smile. "Okay," she said, and then went in. He took a bike to the market, got the required things he needed, and then came back to the house without wasting time. But he was just entering the compound when he saw people gathered in front of the house. "What's going on?" he asked rhetorically, hurrying inside the house without saying even a hello to those people outside, and he went straight into the living room where Mom was sitting with folded arms. As soon as she saw him, she sighed. "Where did you go?" she questioned. "I went to get a few personal things," Jeffrey said. "What's going on?" I saw some people outside, he added. My dear, preparations have started already for Mama's burial and your father's funeral. Your uncle also arrived with some guys to carry the mirror in Mama's room for cleanup, she said. What? Jeffrey exclaimed. But Auntie Ibinabo's? He said, but Mom cut in. See, I beg you, I'm facing enough problems already. Let that mirror be with whatever that's in it. I don't want wahala Mom said, popping her eyes, and then Jeffrey's uncle came into the living room with some guys behind him. Uncle, what's going on? Jeffrey asked, looking at him. We need to take out the mirror for cleanup. Mama wished to be buried with it, he said. The mirror? Jeffrey quizzed. Yes, his uncle questioned, running his eyes through Jeffrey's body. Do you have a problem with that? He asked. No I don't, Jeffrey said. And then he remembered the phrase in the book all of a sudden. You can now accomplish whatever you think of, minor things around you. His uncle was already on his way to Mama's room with those guys. I wish I could freeze everyone till I'm done freeing Auntie Ibinabo's trapped ghost. Jeffrey whispered to himself, and in the twinkle of an eye, everybody around froze, including Mom except him. He went close to Mom, waved a hand before her face, but she didn't even move, her gaze was fixed. He then hurried into Mama's room with an empty big basin in one hand and the book in the other hand. He filled the basin with water from Mama's bathroom, chewed the seeds of alligator pepper, backed the mirror, and then put the bitter cola and cola nuts in the basin of water. He stepped into the basin with the book in his hands, opened it, and then read the incantations aloud. Before he knew what was happening, there was this breeze inside the room, almost bringing down the curtains, which calmed almost immediately. Auntie Ibinabo's ghost stepped out of the mirror in tears, raised her head, and then looked at him. Thank you, she said, smiling from ear to ear. I'm grateful, she added. I wish I could give you a hug, but, Jeffrey said, with tears dropping down his cheeks. And all of a sudden, an image in white with a face looking so old appeared in the mirror. Please help me too, save me, the ghost said. It was the ghost of Grandma's twin sister. Jeffrey was stunned as soon as he saw the ghost. He turned, locking stares with Auntie Ibinabo's ghost, and then turned back, staring at the ghost in the mirror. She looked like Grandma, even though she was looking darker and older than Grandma, and her face could tell that she had been trapped in the mirror for some time now. Whose ghost are you? Jeffrey quizzed with eyes still glued to it. I am Dorothy, your Grandma's twin sister, she said in a shaky and pitiful tone. Grandma's twin? I don't understand. How did your ghost get trapped in her mirror? He questioned. Your grandmother, Doris, sacrificed me for money and then trapped my soul in here, she said, dropping a tear. She stood in the mirror looking so old. One would even think that she birthed Grandma because of how old she looked. What? Jeffrey exclaimed all of a sudden. No, I don't believe this. Yes, I know that Grandma was mean, but was she this mean? He asked, turning to Auntie Ibinabo's ghost. Even though I was just a little child when we were told that Grandma's twin died. I didn't really know her, but this ghost looks so much like the older version of Grandma, he added. Auntie Ibinabo's ghost then looked at him and then let out a smile. Yes, your Grandma was this mean, she said, pointing at the other ghost in the mirror. But if I heard right, she said that Grandma sacrificed her for money. I do not understand that part, Jeffrey said. The ghost in the mirror sighed with its head bowed, and then it raised its head. Before you were born, your father and his younger brother, Ibinabo's husband, she said, pointing toward Auntie Ibinabo's ghost. Then she continued, your father and his brother were so poor that they couldn't even boast of the lowest denomination in their pockets back then. They did all sorts of menial jobs despite being graduates, and even went as far as doing laundry for their neighbors just to get paid. Your grandmother, my twin sister, then joined a dreaded cult group in town and was told to make some sacrifices for her children to thrive and succeed. I was then chosen by their god as a sacrifice to pave the way for her children, which your grandmother did without hesitation, not even thinking about my own children, and how they would feel and cope with my demise. She came to my house one morning to offer me just an orange which she had poisoned, and I received it with joy and gladness. You brought just an orange all the way down from your house? I had asked her, giggling, while already peeling off the back with my thumb. I bought just a few this morning, so I decided to bring one for you. I didn't want to come visiting empty-handed, and there's love in sharing, you know, she had said with a grin. I nodded, already sucking the orange. She later left my house, and that night she appeared to me in person and then strangled me to death with her bare hands. My heart was later harvested by her, which was used in making the money ritual. As if that was not enough, she trapped me in this mirror, and I have been in here ever since you were a child. Now I need rest, and my soul yearns for freedom. So I beg of you, my son, to please save my soul, she said in tears. Mama was so cruel, Auntie Ibinabo's ghost said, shaking her head. My children cried out their eyes the day I was buried. Seeing me lay in that coffin without a heart broke all of them. I had the chance to avenge my death, but because my twin sister was involved and I didn't want to do anything to hurt her, I decided not to fight. I left the fight for God, but I was shocked and surprised when she later summoned me here to trap me. I really loved her, she was all I had, but she betrayed me. That part broke Jeffrey so much that he immediately broke down in tears. If siblings could no longer trust each other, who then could be trusted? He wiped his tears and then looked up. I would free you, Mama, but what is the repercussion? He asked. Her ghost sighed with head bowed and then raised it. If you free me now, all your father had will crumble before your very eyes. Even your uncle will go so broke that if he sees a leaf on the ground, he will mistake it for money, the ghost said. What? Jeffrey exclaimed with mouth agape and popped eyes. You mean we would all go back to square one? Each and every one of us? He queried. The ghost nodded. Yes, it said, please, I'm already so exhausted being trapped in here. Just help free me. But you just said we would all go back to square one after freeing you, and I really don't wish for that to happen. I'm sorry, I can't help you, Jeffrey said with his face turned aside. Please, I beg you in the name of whatever or whoever you hold dear, allow me to go and rest in peace. Jeffrey said, stuttering, and all of a sudden someone opened the door. To his shock, it was his uncle. He thought he had frozen everyone, but he didn't know how his uncle had unfrozen himself and come into the room. As soon as his uncle saw him in the room, he was stunned. Jeffrey, he exclaimed, what are you doing in Mama's room? He demanded. Jeffrey started to shiver, with his heart beating so fast, almost popping out of his chest. Sir, he said in stutters. I said, what are you doing? His uncle quizzed again, shutting the door behind him. He approached Jeffrey, turned, and then peeped into the basin of water with cola nuts and bitter cola in it. You this boy, what are you trying to do? He asked, staring at Jeffrey, but the boy stood there like a log of wood in shivers, holding the book in a very tight hug. His uncle gave him a slap and then grabbed the book from his hands. He opened the first page but found nothing. He opened the second and third page again, but it was blank. He then opened the book from the middle. Auntie Ibinabo's ghost stood there with mouth agape, and was even more worried for Jeffrey as it was written all over her face. And Grandma's twin's ghost. She paused, standing in the mirror with eyes popped open, staring at Jeffrey's uncle. But Jeffrey was the only one who was seeing both of them. His uncle did not. What? You're summoning my mother's ghost? His uncle exclaimed, with the book stretched forth. No, I wasn't. I can explain. I was, Jeffrey said. But his uncle cut him off and then landed another thunderous slap on his face. Auntie Ibinabo's ghost tried grabbing his hand, but she was just catching nothing but air. So your mother sent you here to do this, right? Because I'm very sure that you didn't do this on your own. What exactly are you summoning my mother for? His uncle quizzed again, and when Jeffrey didn't answer, he started to beat him up and then grabbed one of his earlobes. He dragged Jeffrey out of the room with it into the living room. He pushed him aside as soon as they arrived in the living room, and then Jeffrey fell on his mom. He was wailing. Jeffrey's mom stood up all of a sudden and then grabbed his uncle's shirt by the neck. His cousins and siblings rushed into the living room to see what the noise was all about, and as soon as they saw Jeffrey, their jaws dropped. What is it? What did my son do? She said, screaming at the top of her voice. But Jeffrey's uncle ignored her, brought out his phone, and then called the police station. I say, what did my son do? Why are you calling the police on him? What did he do? Jeffrey's mom queried at the top of her voice again, pushing his uncle backward and almost tearing his shirt, and then burst into tears. What did he do now? Talk to us, the people around echoed. See this book. I found it with this useless son of yours. With a basin of water, with cola nuts and bitter cola in it. In my mother's room, trying to summon my mother's ghost, he said. What? Everyone exclaimed again, with gazes fixed on Jeffrey. What? Jeffrey, I hope it's not what I'm thinking, his mom said, staring at him. Jeffrey started to sob and then managed to let out a few words. It is, he said. Hey! Everyone exclaimed with hands on their heads. No, please, that's not what I meant, his mom said amidst sobs, but nobody cared to listen to her. they all turned to each other and started to whisper to each other in murmurs. "You must tell the police what you were trying to do in my mother's room." Jeffrey's uncle raged. Jeffrey was still sitting on the floor in tears, with a hand placed on one of his cheeks. Before he knew what was happening, a police van drove into the compound. The officers came in, and after Jeffrey's uncle had explained the situation to them, one of them pulled Jeffrey up with a hand stuck in the waistline of his trousers. "Get up, my friend," the officer yelled, dragging Jeffrey up, and then took him outside while his mother and the people around followed from behind. "Wait and hear me out," Jeffrey's mother yelled at the officer holding him. He paused suddenly and looked back. "I can't take this anymore," she continued, facing Jeffrey's uncle. "You ingrate, my son was only trying to free your wife's ghost that your mother trapped in the mirror. Do you think your mother was a good person? She was a wicked witch." "What?" Jeffrey's uncle exclaimed. "I don't understand," he said, staring at Jeffrey's mother. Just then, 3 jeeps drove into the compound, distracting everyone. They all stared at the cars, wondering who they could be. The doors of the cars opened, and some armed army officers came out. Some of them hurried to the 3rd car, and one of them opened the back door. It was Jeffrey's father's friend, a top army officer. As soon as he came down, the same army officer who opened the door for him hurried to the other side of the car, opening that door as well. To everyone's surprise, Jeffrey's father stepped out. As soon as everyone saw him, except for the police officers, they fled, including Jeffrey's mother and uncle. But Jeffrey wasn't scared at all. He was just so glad that his father had come back. He stood there smiling, while the police officer still held onto his trousers in a tight grip. Jeffrey's father approached them with the army officers following behind. He was limping, his legs looking okay except for a fracture on one of them. "What's going on here?" he queried, staring at Jeffrey and then at the officer behind him, but the officer said nothing. "My friend, what's going on? Why are you holding my son like that?" he raged. Jeffrey's mother slowly walked back to him. "Is that truly you?" she asked, touching his shirt. "It's me," he replied, and she grabbed him, hugging him tightly. Then the people who had fled started reappearing one after the other, including Jeffrey's uncle. "Will someone tell me what's going on?" Jeffrey's father fumed. Jeffrey looked at him and explained everything. "What?" his father exclaimed, and then asked that the mirror be brought out. It was brought out, but no one saw anything except Jeffrey. Jeffrey's uncle stood there with his mouth agape, trying to comprehend all that was happening. Jeffrey then told them that his grandmother's twin was still trapped in the mirror. "Bring her out," his father said. "What?" Jeffrey exclaimed. "No, he can't," his uncle yelled suddenly. "Shut up, you fool," Jeffrey's father exclaimed, shunning him. "What if I had died?" "You would have treated my family however you like," he added, and Jeffrey's uncle bowed his head in shame. Jeffrey's father continued, "I was on my way to catch the flight back to Nigeria the day it crashed, but Jeffrey called and narrated his dream to me. So I was in the car contemplating whether to travel that day or not when the car had an accident and got burnt. But the driver and I managed to escape before it caught fire, leaving my phone and my bag behind." "Ah!" everyone exclaimed. "You see, when we were still very poor, my mother brought a heart of whatever it was on a plate and asked me to eat it, but I refused. I don't know why, but I didn't feel like eating it. Mama raged in anger, even threatened me with all sorts, but I refused to eat it. However, my younger brother here did," Jeffrey's father said, pointing towards his uncle, who still stood there with a bowed head. "So my wealth is from God. I hustled my way out of poverty," he added. Everyone around started to murmur again. The mirror was brought out, and then Jeffrey freed his grandmother's twin's ghost. "No!" his uncle screamed suddenly, with his eyes popped open. "Thank you. Now I can rest," the ghost said with a smile. "Tell your uncle that I'm disappointed in him. And to my children, I love them so much, and I wish them a longer life. Good night, Jeffrey. Thank you," Auntie Ibn Abo's ghost said, waving at Jeffrey. And then it disappeared alongside the other ghost. Grandmother was buried by her cult group, of course, with her mirror. As for Jeffrey's uncle, everything he had crumbled. Even though Jeffrey's father gave him a huge sum of money to start all over, the money mysteriously disappeared from his account. He gave him another, and the same thing happened. Jeffrey's father started to give his children money instead. And they all did well, except for their father, who had taken to drinking. A few years later, Jeffrey's father passed away, having willed all of his property to Jeffrey. The end. Thank you for watching. If you like this story, then please drop a comment. We love you.